My son's wife screamed at me in front of the entire Christmas table. "Nobody wants you here, old woman. Go back to your nursing home." I walked out without a word, drove straight to my lawyer's office, and changed everything. 3 weeks later, they found out. "Good day, dear friends. It's Emma. And I'm so glad you're here with me today. Please stay until the very end. And let me know in the comments what city you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. Now let me tell you what happened. I spent 41 years building a life I was proud of. I raised my son, Daniel, on my own after his father left when Daniel was 7. I worked double shifts at the hospital where I was a registered nurse, packed his lunches every single morning, sat in the bleachers at every single baseball game, even when my feet were swollen from standing 12 hours straight. When Daniel graduated from college, I cried so hard the woman next to me handed me tissues and patted my arm like I was the one who needed comforting. I was. I had given that boy everything I had. After I retired at 62, I moved from Ohio to be closer to Daniel and his wife, Renee, and their 2 children, my grandson Tyler, who was 9, and my granddaughter Sophie, who had just turned 6. I sold the house I'd lived in for 27 years and bought a small place 11 minutes away from them. Close enough to help. Far enough to give them space. I thought I had that balance figured out. The first year was wonderful. Sunday dinners, school pickups when they needed me, birthday parties where I baked the cakes from scratch. Renee and I were never best friends, but we were cordial. Warm, even. She would text me recipes sometimes. I would bring her coffee when I came to visit. It worked. Then Daniel's contracting business started growing. He won a large commercial bid, and suddenly, they had more money than they'd ever had. They bought a bigger house in a nicer part of town. New cars. Renee stopped working her part-time bookkeeping job. And slowly, like a tide going out so gradually, you don't notice until the beach is bare, things changed. The Sunday dinners became every other Sunday. Then once a month. Then we'll let you know, Mom. Tyler's baseball games I was still invited to, but Renee's parents always seemed to have the better seats, the reserved spots next to Daniel on the bleachers. I told myself families shift and rearrange. I told myself it was fine, but there were moments. Small ones that I tucked away and tried to forget. The time Renee introduced me to her neighbor as Daniel's mother, with a tone that made it sound like a mild inconvenience. The Christmas card they sent with a family photo inside, the 4 of them smiling beautifully. And I realized I had not been invited to that photo session. The way Sophie started calling me Grandma Emma only when prompted, like she needed a reminder of who I was. 6 months before the Christmas I need to tell you about, Daniel asked to borrow money. His business was expanding faster than his cash flow could keep up with, he said. Equipment costs. He needed $45,000. Just temporarily. He would pay me back with interest inside of a year. I had savings. I had my nursing pension, my Social Security, and an inheritance from my own mother that I had invested carefully for 20 years. I could afford it. And this was my son. So I wrote the check and thought nothing more of it. 2 months later, Renee called to ask if I could contribute toward a vacation home they were putting a deposit on. A lake house, she said. The children would love it. It would be a family gathering place. I hesitated, and she quickly added, "Of course. You would always be welcome there. Always be welcome." In a home I helped purchase. I said I needed to think about it. I never got back to her, and she never asked again. But something in her voice when we spoke after that was cooler, clipped, as if my hesitation had been a small betrayal. I noticed then what I should have noticed before. Every time I helped, the warmth returned briefly. Every time I paused or said no or needed something from them, the temperature dropped. I told myself I was imagining it. Mothers do that. We explain away the things that hurt us because the alternative is too painful to consider. December came. I had been looking forward to Christmas for months. I bought gifts carefully. Tyler was into astronomy. So, I found him a quality beginner's telescope. Sophie loved art. So I put together a proper set of professional watercolors, with real brushes and a wooden case. For Daniel, I bought a leather jacket he had admired in a store window back in October when we had grabbed lunch together, one of the few times that year we had been alone. For Renee, I chose a cashmere cardigan in the deep green she always wore and a gift card to her favorite spa. I baked for 3 days. Shortbread, my mother's pecan pie, the cranberry walnut bread that Daniel had grown up asking for every December without fail. I wrapped everything carefully. I drove to their house on Christmas afternoon with my car so full I had to lay the telescope box flat across the back seat. The driveway was crowded when I arrived. Renee's parents were there. Her sister's family. 3 other cars I didn't recognize. I could hear the noise through the front door. Children running, Christmas music, the warm, loud sound of a full house in celebration. My heart lifted. I had not felt part of something in months. I rang the bell. Renee answered. She was dressed beautifully, her hair done, a glass of wine in her hand. When she saw me, her smile did not reach her eyes. "Oh," she said. Just that. "Oh, Merry Christmas," I said. I brought the cranberry bread and the kids' gifts. She stepped partway into the doorframe, not opening it wider. "We're kind of in the middle of things." "I know. I'm here for Christmas dinner," Daniel said. 4 o'clock. "Daniel said he'd call you." Her voice was flat. "Matter of fact, he didn't call." "Well," she glanced back into the house, "we have a lot of people here. Family." I stared at her. "I'm family. What happened next? I will never fully be able to explain, because it was so far outside anything I had prepared myself for." Renee's mother appeared in the hallway behind her daughter, then Renee's sister. They weren't trying to help. They were watching. And Renee, emboldened maybe by the wine or the audience, or simply by having decided long before this moment exactly who I was to her, looked me in the eye and said, "Nobody wants you here, old woman. Go back to your nursing home." I heard laughter from somewhere deeper in the house. I did not know if it was directed at me. I did not wait to find out. I set the bags of gifts and the baked goods on the porch step. My hands were steady. My face was steady. I turned around and walked back to my car. And I sat there for 1 minute, with my hands in my lap. And then I drove away. I did not cry until I was on the highway. Then I cried so hard I had to pull off at a rest stop and sit there with the engine running and my forehead on the steering wheel. 41 years. 41 years of baseball games, and double shifts, and choosing this boy over every easier version of my life. And his wife had just called me an old woman and told me to go back to a nursing home I didn't even live in front of her family, while my son was somewhere in that house not coming to the door. I sat at that rest stop for 20 minutes. Then I called my attorney. Carol Hendricks had handled my estate planning for 11 years. She had drawn up my will, my power of attorney, my healthcare directive. She was thorough and kind, and had known me since before Daniel's wedding. Her assistant picked up, and I asked for an emergency appointment for the following morning. "Carol will make time," her assistant said, in a tone that told me something in my voice communicated how serious this was. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote down everything I could remember. Every loan, every gift, every moment I had been made to feel like a transaction rather than a mother. The $45,000 loan repaid $0 so far. The $6,000 I had sent when Tyler needed orthodontia. The $8,000 I had contributed to the down payment on the house before this one because they were short. My mother's anniversary clock sitting on Renee's mantle, given as a housewarming gift because Renee had admired it, now clearly decorating a home where I was not welcome. I added the numbers. In 3 years, I had given or lent my son and his wife $67,000, not counting the small things. Not counting the babysitting, the school pickups, the meals I had cooked and driven over when they were overwhelmed. Not counting 11 minutes of my life, I had moved 3 states to spend near people who apparently considered me a nuisance. I did not feel angry sitting there at my kitchen table. I felt something colder and clearer than anger. I felt finished. Carol's office was quiet on the day after Christmas. She listened to everything without interrupting, only making small notes on her legal pad. When I was done, she took her glasses off and set them on the desk. "You mentioned grandchildren," she said. "Tyler and Sophie, 9 and 6. And your current will leaves everything to Daniel?" "Everything. The house, the investment accounts, the life insurance. Just over $900,000 total." Carol nodded slowly. "What do you want to do?" I had thought about this all night. Daniel gets nothing. But I don't want to punish the children. She leaned forward. "Then here's what I suggest. We remove Daniel and Renee entirely and establish 2 separate educational trust funds, one for Tyler and one for Sophie. Each trust is administered by an independent trustee. The funds can only be used for education, starting with college. Daniel and Renee have zero access to or control over those funds." I felt something shift in my chest when she said it. That was the answer. That was exactly the answer. "Yes," I said. "Do that. The remainder of your estate after the trusts? Charities, the hospital where I worked for 30 years, the children's wing specifically, and a domestic violence shelter I've supported for years." Carol drafted the documents with the precision of someone who had done this many times and understood the weight of it. She called in her paralegal and her office manager to witness. It took less than 40 minutes to undo what I had spent a lifetime building for my son. Walking out into the December air, I felt something I had not expected. Not sadness. Not even relief. Something closer to dignity. Like I had finally stopped apologizing for existing. Daniel called on December 27th. I had not heard from him on Christmas, not a single text, not one call to check whether I had arrived home safely after being turned away from his door. He called 2 days later. "Mom." His voice was careful, measured. "Renee told me what happened. I want to talk about it." I sat down in my kitchen chair. "Go ahead." She said it got heated. She said things came out wrong. Came out wrong. She called me an old woman and told me to go back to my nursing home, Daniel. Silence. In front of her entire family, I continued. "While you were in the house. I didn't know you were at the door. I was in the back. For 20 minutes I knocked and rang the bell." More silence. "Then, Mom, Renee has been under a lot of stress. The holidays, the business stuff, everything. She didn't mean it." I closed my eyes. This was the moment. I understood then. That would define the rest of my life. Not what Renee had said to me. Not the closed door. This moment, where my son was asking me to accept an explanation so thin you could see through it. "I'm not going to pretend nothing happened," I said. "Nobody's asking you to pretend. I've been understanding for 3 years, Daniel." His tone shifted. "What does that mean?" "It means I moved here for you. I have been here for every school play and sick day and financial shortfall. I have made myself small, so I wouldn't intrude on the life you built. And your wife called me an old woman in front of strangers, and your response is that she's been under stress. You're exaggerating." I hung up. He called back 4 times. I didn't answer. Late that night, he sent a text. "Mom, please, let's not do this. Renee is sorry. Come to dinner Sunday. We can reset." I read it and set the phone face down on the nightstand. Sunday passed. I did not go to dinner. I did not call. I spent the day with my neighbor Patricia, who was 74 and had been my closest friend since I moved here. We drank coffee and watched old movies, and she did not ask me to explain anything because I had told her everything the day after Christmas, and she had responded the way only the very best people do. She had said, "You are not crazy. She was wrong. And you don't owe anyone more than you've already given." 2 weeks into January, Daniel showed up at my house. He came alone, which surprised me. He stood on my front step looking like a boy, which he would always be to me no matter how old or how wrong he was. And I let him in, because he was still my son. He sat on my couch and said he was sorry. He said he should have come to the door. He said Renee had apologized in the letter she had written. And had I read it? I told him I had not opened the letter. He looked stricken. "Mom, we're family. We want you in our lives. The kids ask about you every day. I want to be in Tyler and Sophie's lives too," I said. He looked relieved. Too quickly relieved. "So we can move past this." "That depends on what moving past it means." He shifted forward. "Look, I know Renee was out of line, but she's my wife. I can't just— I'm not asking you to leave your wife. Then what are you asking? I'm asking you to acknowledge what happened and make sure it never happens again. And I am telling you that my financial relationship with your family is over." His expression changed. "What does that mean?" "It means the $45,000 loan is forgiven. We're even. But there will be no more loans, no more contributions, no more anything." "Mom, I'm not asking for money. This isn't about money. I know it isn't for you right now. But I need you to know where I stand." He looked at me for a long moment. "Did you change your will?" The question came out too quickly, too directly, like he had been thinking it since before he sat down. "My estate is my business," I said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Renee's parents said you might do something drastic. We just want to know the kids are taken care of." And there it was. I had wondered how long it would take to get to the real point of the visit. "Tyler and Sophie are taken care of," I said. "That's all you need to know. Mom, whatever you've done, just think about it more. You're emotional. You just went through something upsetting. These decisions shouldn't be made in the middle of a— I made this decision with my attorney, with a full night of sleep, and with complete clarity." I stood up. "I think you should go, Daniel. You're being unreasonable." "I'm being very reasonable. What's unreasonable is asking me to forget that your wife humiliated me in front of a house full of people while you sat 40 feet away and did nothing." He stood. "I didn't know you were at the door. You knew I was supposed to be there." He left without saying goodbye. I watched his car pull out of my driveway and felt the particular grief of loving someone who keeps disappointing you and knowing that you are not going to stop loving them. You are just going to stop being available for their convenience. The letter from a law firm arrived the 3rd week of January. 2 pages, dense with language about capacity and undue influence and fiduciary concerns. Renee and Daniel were questioning my competency to make legal decisions. They were suggesting that my attorney had taken advantage of my emotional state following a family misunderstanding to manipulate my estate planning against my own best interests. I called Carol before I had even finished reading it. "I expected this," she said. "They have no case. Your will changes are legally bulletproof, but we'll need to document everything, and you should probably get a formal cognitive evaluation to preempt any incompetency claims." "Fine. Schedule it." Dr. James Okafor was a geriatric psychiatrist who spent 3 hours with me on a cold Tuesday in February. He tested my memory, my reasoning, my understanding of financial documents, my awareness of my own circumstances. At the end, he looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Mrs. Emma, I've evaluated hundreds of patients. You are sharper than most people, half your age. I'll have the report to your attorney by Friday." The report was thorough and unambiguous. I was competent in every measurable way. I was also, according to Dr. Okafor's notes, someone who had made a series of rational, well-documented financial decisions consistent with her long-term values, and free of any external coercion. I was also doing something else in those weeks that I had not told Daniel about. I was talking to people. My friend Patricia had connected me with a support group for grandparents navigating estrangement, 15 people who met every Thursday evening in the community room at the local library. I was reluctant the first time. I thought sitting in a circle talking about my feelings was not something I needed. I was wrong. The first night I listened more than I spoke. A man named Howard, 71, had not seen his 3 grandchildren in 4 years after a dispute with his daughter-in-law. A woman named Beverly had spent $50,000 helping her son through a business failure only to be cut out of his life when he recovered. A retired teacher named Grace had been told by her adult daughter that her presence created anxiety, and she should only visit by scheduled appointment, given 2 weeks' notice. I was not alone. That sounds small. It was not small. It was the thing that kept me standing in the weeks that followed. Daniel and Renee's legal filing went nowhere quickly. Carol responded with Dr. Okafor's evaluation, a detailed accounting of all my financial decisions with Margaret, the new financial advisor I had hired in January, and a timeline of documented incidents, including dates, the social media posts Renee had made over the past year, with captions that told a story about how she really saw me, and written statements from Patricia and 2 other neighbors who had witnessed the pattern of behavior toward me. The judge who reviewed the preliminary filing declined to move forward. She noted in her order that the evidence did not support any claim of incapacity or undue influence, and that the petitioners appeared to be motivated primarily by financial interest rather than genuine concern for the respondents' welfare. Carol called me when the ruling came through. "It's done," she said. "They can appeal, but they won't. There's nothing to appeal." I sat in my kitchen with the phone in my hand for a long time after she hung up. 9 months had passed since Christmas. 9 months since I had stood on my son's front step, holding cranberry bread, and been told to go back to a nursing home I didn't live in. My life was different now. I want to be honest about how different, because it would be easy to make this sound like a clean and happy ending, and the truth is more complicated than that. I still love Daniel. I would always love him. That didn't go anywhere. Some nights I lay awake and thought about him at 7 years old, the year his father left, when he crawled into my bed at 2 in the morning and said, "Are you going to leave too?" And I had held him and promised him I would never leave. I had kept that promise longer than was healthy for me. I had confused keeping my promise with accepting any version of treatment his household decided to dish out. Those nights I got up and made tea and sat with Biscuit, the rescue beagle I had adopted in February, and I let myself feel the grief without trying to fix it or explain it away. Grief is not failure. It is the price of love, and I had loved my son with everything I had. But the grief was only part of what I felt. The other part was something I hadn't expected. I had time now. Real time. Not time held hostage to whether Daniel would call or whether Renee would decide this week I was welcome. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center and discovered, to my instructor's patient amusement, that I was not naturally talented. I painted crooked landscapes and muddy bowls of fruit and laughed at myself in a way I had forgotten I could. I started swimming 3 mornings a week at the YMCA and met a group of women who called themselves the Morning Mermaids and were the funniest and most unsentimental people I had ever encountered. I went back to the hospital where I had worked for 30 years, not as a nurse but as a volunteer. I read to patients in the long-term care ward on Wednesday afternoons. Some of them had no visitors. Some of them had family who came sporadically and guiltily. I sat with them and read whatever they wanted: mysteries, baseball statistics, celebrity gossip, scripture. I was useful in the way I understood how to be useful. Not because someone needed my checkbook, but because I had knowledge and time, and I had learned that those things were enough. Patricia and I started a small book club, 5 women, all over 60, all with complicated histories and strong opinions about fiction. We met every other Tuesday and talked about books for 20 minutes and about everything else for 2 hours. We went to the farmers' market together on Saturday mornings. We drove down to see the fall leaves in the mountains in October and shared one hotel room and laughed until midnight. Through the support group, I had connected with a woman named Diane, whose situation was almost a mirror of mine. She had been cut off from her grandchildren by a vindictive daughter-in-law and had spent 4 years in legal limbo trying to establish visitation rights. She had eventually succeeded through a grandparents' rights petition in her state, and she walked me through the process calmly and without drama. I filed a petition in the spring. The outcome was still pending, but my attorney believed the case was strong. I was not aggressive about it. I did not want to use the courts as a weapon. I wanted to have a relationship with Tyler and Sophie that existed independently of their parents' feelings about me. Whether that was possible remained to be seen. What I knew for certain was this: my grandchildren's futures were protected. 2 trust funds, professionally managed, untouchable by Daniel or Renee, waiting for Tyler and Sophie when they were ready for college. Whatever happened with their parents, whatever choices those 2 children made as they grew up, they would have a grandmother who had thought about them when it was hard to think about anything clearly, and had made sure they were taken care of. I heard things occasionally through the community. Daniel's business had hit a rough patch. The commercial contract he had been so proud of had not renewed. They had taken out a second mortgage on the lake house that had never quite materialized. Renee had gone back to work. I did not feel satisfaction about any of this. I felt something closer to sadness and a kind of tired recognition that greed is always eventually its own consequence. Patricia told me she had seen Daniel at the grocery store in September. He had looked thin, she said. He had asked how I was. She told him I was well. He had nodded and walked away. On Christmas this year, I hosted dinner at my house. Patricia and her husband, Howard, from the support group, who had started seeing his grandchildren again after a painful mediation process. Beverly and her new husband, a retired firefighter named Roy, who made everyone laugh. Grace and her daughter, who had finally found a way to a relationship that worked for both of them. My swim instructor Janet and her wife. My neighbor couple from across the street, who always brought too much wine and not enough chairs. 14 people around my dining room table, in my house, with my food and my candles, and biscuit weaving hopefully between everyone's legs. The noise was the good kind of noise. Overlapping voices and real laughter, the kind that happens when people are glad to be exactly where they are. I stood in my kitchen doorway for a moment before I went in to join them, and I thought about the woman who had driven to a rest stop 11 months ago and put her forehead on a steering wheel and wondered how she would survive this. She had survived it by deciding that her life was her own. You spend so many years making yourself necessary to the people you love. You confuse being needed with being valued. You accept less than you deserve because the alternative feels like failure, like you did something wrong, like you must have somehow earned the way they treat you. You don't. Sometimes you can love someone completely and correctly, and they still choose greed over gratitude. That is not your failure. That is theirs. My name is on a plaque now, in the children's wing at the hospital where I worked for 3 decades. A small brass plate on the reading room door. It says the room was made possible by a gift in honor of the nurses who gave their years to this place. I see it every Wednesday when I walk past to sit with my patients. It is not a monument to anything grand. It is just proof that I was here, that I gave what I had, and that I chose carefully who deserved it. If you are sitting somewhere right now feeling invisible, feeling like the love you gave was counted up and measured and found insufficient by people who took everything you offered and still wanted more, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not determined by who failed to appreciate you. It is not measured in holidays you were excluded from or doors that were shut in your face. It is there, whole and unchanged, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to say enough. You are allowed to build a life that is not organized around the possibility that someone will finally decide you deserve a seat at the table. I am 64 years old, and I have more joy in my life right now than I have had in a decade. I did not find it by fighting harder for people who had already decided what I was worth to them. I found it by deciding, finally, what I was worth to myself. If this story touched something in you, please subscribe and let me know what city you're listening from today. Leave me a comment. Tell me your story. You'd be surprised how many of us are sitting in different cities with the same ache in our chests, and how much lighter it gets when we know we're not alone. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Your story isn't over. Not even close.